Hello and welcome back, everyone, to GFF live stream. I hope you enjoyed maڵni, towards the ocean, towards the shore. We are so excited to have filmmaker Sky Hopinka with us tonight for a post-screening Q&A. Welcome, Sky.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah. Thanks so much for joining us. I guess I just wanted to just kind of start off the top. Obviously, this film, a beautiful, lush film set in the Pacific Northwest, following two characters, Jordan and Sweetwater. Could you tell me a little bit about why you chose these particular subjects? They seem to be very, in a way, everyday, but also very singular characters, and maybe a little bit about your relationship with them.
Yeah, well, I guess it starts with my relationship with them. I've known Sweetwater since 2006. She was one of the first people I met when I moved to Portland, Oregon, and started to go to college at Portland State. And remember, she was the first person I met with the two other people that were like, come to this Native student group meeting, So I went and checked out the Native Center there. And since then, we've been friends and we've been close. And she's someone that I really identify with Portland, and also just like someone that's important to me in my life. And same with Jordan. I first met Jordan in 2010 or 11. No, in 2011, because I was starting to learn Chinookan, and I was trying to get language groups organized around campus, and Jordan is Grand Rounds, and so it's a heritage language. And even one of the sources for the text that we have in terms of documentation from the 30s and 40s comes from his great-grandfather. So he's a really strong tie to the language and has done a lot of cultural work since I first met him in 2011. He works with the tribe, the Culture and Heritage Department. I think that's what the department's called. And he's just really lives the ways, and he just does the work. And it's a big part of his life. And when I started thinking about this film, it was about Chinookan, and with this first feature, it was something that I wanted to do in the Northwest and return to Chinookan and the landscape and the language and the people, because it's been a part of my filmmaking practice since the beginning, really. It's the first pick of the camera. It felt natural to include Jordan. We made a short film in 2013 called Hui Hui that was all in Chinookan, where we both act in it. And it was, again, one of those things that just, what can we do with cinema? What can we do with the language? And how can we help revitalization of the process?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's right. And that's a good segue into, the language of the film, partially filmed in English, mostly with Sweetwater, and then with Jordan, mostly in Chinookan, a language that's indigenous to the Pacific Northwest, and I guess is, I guess, could you just tell us a little bit about your choice to use both of these languages and not just do it solely in Chinookan, or kind of, and also maybe for the viewers at home what the title maڵni means?
Mm-hmm. When I first started thinking about this film, I figured I wanted it all to be in Chinook, just everything and everyone speaking in Chinook. But I don't know, just the way that I also make films is just kind of by chance and seeing who's available and who's interested and who just kind of shows up. And Jordan was there from the beginning, and when I was doing certain shots with him just around Grand Rounds and the canoe journey, just a big part of our presence in the landscape and on these canoes and in these forests was just talking to each other in Chinook. And Sweetwater, she came about with I don't know, probably when I first started doing some test shots and trying to figure out how to use a gimbal, or those kind of handheld things. And remember, I was in Portland visiting to do shooting, and she was a layover because she was working out a flight attendant at the time, and we hadn't seen each other in a while, so we just wanted to hang out for a day. And so she came out with me to the coast just to visit and catch up, and she was just on camera as I was doing these tests, and I don't know, it just felt right to include her. She also appeared in another short film that I made called Anti-Objects, Space Without Path or Boundary. And that was a very similar sort of situation where I was in town. I wanted to shoot the bridge in Portland, and we were hanging out, and she just ended up with some shots, and also just signified, for me, just, what Indigenous presence in this city looks like and what Indigenous presence in these landscapes look like contemporarily today. And she doesn't speak Chinook. And so we were going back and forth, just should she'd try and like say something in English and then I can translate it and have her say it back to me, but that just felt too disingenuous. And there is like a relationship between speaking English and growing up speaking English. Like, the first language that I learned is English. It's the language that, I was born speaking, and my mom speaks, my dad speaks. And there's a certain shame that, I don't know, I've experienced just with the fact that I don't know my heritage language, and that I don't speak Ho-Chunk, which is like the language of my father, or Pachanga, the language of my mother. And I don't know, just it felt really natural and right to try and balance these two ways of existing and expressing yourself, like Jordan speaking Chinook and Sweetwater speaking English, and treating them flatly in a sort of way, and trying to, I don't know, not try and I don't know, reassert that sort of shame that one feels with not having a connection to your language or your culture in some ways, or just try to assert like how we all survive and how we continue to survive. And so it was like an obvious, easy choice. Jordan speaks Chinook, it's subtitled in English, and Sweetwater speaks English, it's subtitled in Chinook.
Yeah. No, it's really great. One of the things you said there kind of made me think of something that I always kind of think about when I think of you and your work. You're talking about how you're shooting, with the gimbal the first time in Sweetwater, and it just kind of felt right, and I remember when I think it was maybe for Jai Proxy or something, I asked, why did you use these certain effects or something? And, I was thinking, here's like this really well-known kind of, almost avant-garde or like experimental filmmaker, and they're going to have like some kind of like conceptual explanation for this. And you're just like, I don't know, just look good. And I don't know, I just found that like really inspiring as a filmmaker to know that, people can just kind of trust their gut, and sometimes you don't need to have an explanation necessarily for everything. I don't know if that's a question, but.
No, I mean, like, I think that's really true, and like really a big part of how I make films and like how I shoot films. And I don't know, I like to think too that, a lot of it is just like how these things start is like, this looks good, this feels good, like this feels right in some sort of way. And then through further making the film, and then it just kind of reveals what some of these deeper intentions are, shooting with Sweetwater initially just like felt right, because like she's my friend, and I really like making films with my friends, like people that I trust and that trust me. And so even just like how the film revealed itself to me to be about this portrait of these two people, as well as myself in some ways, I suppose, with the camera, but just these two friends of mine and how they move through this world and how they negotiate these bigger issues of life and death and historical trauma and again, survival.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I think that comes through. Do you ever worry about that you're going to it's like too close or kind of incestuous or like, I don't know, like I often kind of think of that if I'm going to like put friends or like, I can't remember maybe it was like Ali Peoples actually saying something about like, and then I started wondering, is this just like lame if I'm putting my friends in my movies all the time? Like, I don't know if that's something you've thought about or how you kind of negotiate that, or I don't know.
I feel like
it across like that at all. Like it comes across as just so sincere and loving. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think like it goes into this different sort of like thinking about community and how communities survive. And so I met Jordan like as we started this language group together, and we both like would teach and learn, and it was a big part of like how we could lean on each other. And it's like, I mean, even with me with this project or most of my films, I tend to shoot, or I do shoot and I do all the sound and I do all the editing by myself. And it's very much like a one person sort of like crew and show or whatever. And then just the other points of collaboration comes from the people that I'm working with, and even just trying to respect their perspectives and express their perspectives in a way that is respectful. So that I think that the sort of relational quality to friends that are close, I think allows me to explore more of the intricacies of trying to survive and to lean on people and to rely on your friends in ways that is vulnerable and that, I don't know, can help begin a lot of the healing or continue the healing that we've all been trying to do.
Yeah. When I watched this film, I mean, I was like obviously super excited that you had a feature film. So definitely, made a point of tuning into the opening night of images and caught it, and I really enjoyed it. And but it did seem to me like, although you could very much feel and hear and see the Sky Hopinka in the film, it did feel a little bit like different than some of your other work in a way. Do you feel that way, or am I off base a little bit?
No, I think you're off base. Like, I think about the film a lot, especially in terms of, I mean, just like the things that I'm interested in doing or not interested in doing, or when I feel like I'm relying too much on a certain formal technique that I've used in other films, and even just this one, not wanting to do too much in terms of overlays or just like keying out
That's
certain
exactly
things.
what I was kind of. That's what I thought of when I saw it. But I mean, it's nice. The images are still very dreamy and poetic, and like all of your films. But you really didn't tamper, I guess, with them. Not that that's a bad thing, but you really let them sit,
I tried a few times early in the early assemblages, and I was like, this doesn't feel like right. This doesn't look right. Or it feels like,
once again.
I mean, even just like thinking about these different techniques as just tools in a toolbox, like how can you employ them in certain ways to what effects, and some films need them and some don't. And also too, like I tend to, in films where I shoot friends or people and there's bodies and spaces, I tend not to do that. I think there's something that I hold precious about that, whether it's like, Jordan on screen or Jordan with his family, and I don't want to fuck with that in a certain way. I think that there's definitely a lot there it's worth exploring or thinking about, or even like talking to my therapist about, but I think it's important to think about even just the history of Indigenous people on the screen and how certain manipulations can affect that representation, and even like legibility and how that affects how people are portrayed, or I don't know. I think I could go in a lot of different directions with this.
Totally, yeah. And we have a question from the audience, but I just want to ask one thing first, because it's just been kind of on my mind, because I mean, I have lots of American friends, but I've never lived there. And I think in Manitoba and Winnipeg, those of us that hope to consider ourselves allies with Indigenous peoples here, trying to figure out how to walk down this very complicated path of reconciliation. These are things we think about, these histories and these things like on a daily basis, I would say, but are in the United States, are people as kind of conscious of these histories of in terms of the Indigenous people? Like I know, like obviously Black Lives Matter is a huge thing right now, not just in the United States, but around the world. And not that takes away from the conversation that you're having, or the histories of the Indigenous people in the United States. I'm just curious if people are as aware of it, and maybe, I don't know, in the United States, I don't know if that's.
I would say no. Yeah. I would say no. And like, it's really hard. Even just like, I mean, in the last like few months too, there's a lot of conversations come up around Indigenous peoples in relationship to Black Lives Matter, and it's just all these different protests and all these different resistance movements that are happening, and whether or not they've gotten seen or are getting seen, it's just like a constant reminder of how the majority of this country thinks of you, and how it's really internalized, and how that's really like, I don't know, affects one's own idea of self-worth, and how one moves through these different landscapes as seen, or even when you are seen, what that quality is, and it can be hard. When the implied sort of understanding of who you are as a person, however you look, or whatever you believe, or whatever tribe or nation you come from, that it isn't valued. And so I would say no, like people don't really think that much of us down here.
I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm sure there are many people that do, because I know there is a lot of amazing, incredible people in the United States, and as you well know.
No, I mean, I don't want to sound like a downer, but I mean, like it's a further encouragement to just think, or not think, but just like do more with like Indigenous people, and I don't know, find the value in these communities that you do have, and these friendships, like the Sweetwater and Jordan, friendship spanning 16 years, 14 years, and family, and even like being in Wisconsin and visiting my people, and seeing the landscape and the effigy mounds and all that are important and markers of our history and our continued presence.
And I'm going to get a question from Lindsay McIntyre here right away, but I just want to, in the same vein, do you feel like your films are in a way like I know that they're, it's not a traditional kind of like call to action film or an activist film, but do you consider them like that at all? Or like specifically this one, because it really is exploring, and other of your work, do you consider it kind of like, are you trying, is it like kind of like in a way an act of activism, or a way of trying to, I don't know, something like that, further that dialogue? Or
Yeah, I mean, I think, this is a question I ask myself all the time, like, and like, what is the value of the work that I make, and like the voice that I have, and the things that I have to say, and like where are the holes in how I present myself or these works, and how can I further understand how they could be more, or how they're just enough, and even just thinking about these films as just forms of refusal as well. Like refusal is a form of resistance, to deny like the white gaze to be I don't know, explained everything that everything means. Like I'm not teaching anyone about Chinookan or even like this culture or these stories or these myths, in terms I think of them as for certain audiences that can understand exactly what I'm talking about and referencing in the film. And again, like hopefully that those sorts of refusals are not denials, but just points of another way of understanding us and how we exist, and how even like the idea of us is such a big idea, like there is no singular us. It's just multiple tribes and peoples and nations and identities. And I think like when you stop having to explain yourself and justify your existence, that frees you up for a lot more.
Yeah. I'm going to go to comment from Lindsay McIntyre here. Hey, Sky, congratulations on your feature. It's beautiful and engaging and honest. I love how you own ways of being in your films and don't cater to explaining or valuing specific things over others. Your presence in voice and in choice and in camera is very prevalent, and that's awesome. Thanks.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Yeah. Let me just pull up my notes here. Oh yeah, one of the things I kind of wanted to ask you about was, Sweetwater, obviously in certain scenes, you really get a sense of kind of her spirituality throughout the film. And I just wondered do you consider yourself a spiritual person?
I do, absolutely. And again, I think that, yeah, like that goes into this sort of refusal. Like, and I was just thinking about this today, just in terms of like the things that I'd like to talk about or don't like to talk about in terms of my own spirituality or beliefs, It's like I don't like to explain what they are because I don't want to like argue for them, And
yeah, that's why I didn't ask specifically, what is your spiritual belief? But, yeah.
And even like this film and other films, I think they're about like me questioning and like, or not questioning, but just like asking questions, about the afterlife, about this space between life and death and reincarnation, or even just like, I don't know, what does it mean to not be reincarnated or not be able to be reincarnated? And how does that relate to looking at one's ancestors or relating to one's ancestors? So yeah, I feel like I'm asking a lot of questions, like to myself and for myself and to my family and to my ancestors with this work, that I don't necessarily expect an answer or expect to understand something in ways that, like aha, but rather this process of questioning, I think, is important to me. Just to ask these questions.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of the imagery, and even the title of the film, and especially some of the voiceover throughout it, especially near the beginning, just really conjures up these images of, us traveling through life and through time, and especially all of the kind of shots traveling through the forest, through the highways or whatever. It was definitely seemed like some spiritual or existential kind of considerations about life and time, and what matters to us and what makes us tick. I guess one of the things that made me wonder about you, because you've obviously had like a very illustrious career. I would even go to so bold to say, you've had some great success, and that's like awesome, but you also don't seem to me like a person who's just like, kind of after these traditional markers of success or something like that. So I guess I just wonder, like, what kind of drives you, I guess, to kind of keep making work or keep kind of, you're a fairly prolific filmmaker. What kind of drives you to do it?
Insecurity. Really, like, yeah, just like, making something and just thinking like, what was I thinking? How could I do this better? Or like, what am I really trying to ask? And I think just like constant, not necessarily, definitely insecurity, doubt, but then also just like this urge to keep on asking these questions and to keep on like making things. And I don't know, I feel like, yeah, especially in the last 5-6 years I've even averaged like 2 short films a year. And I think I'm also, after the completion of this film, I just feel exhausted. I'm just really tired. And it's just been nice to just kind of focus on reading or even just like writing a bit. And to think about these other sorts of ways of, processing. And I don't know, I'm taking a lot of still photographs lately. And like, it's so nice to re-engage with a camera in a different way, through that.
I am so, after the last couple months of putting this festival together, I am so much looking forward to reading some books. You have no idea. And also, like one of the reasons I end up going back to photography or doing little things like the Super 8 one take, where it's like from the hip, you have one roll of Super 8, you have to make a film in like a weekend. It's almost like a palate cleanser to just like do something. That's how I feel about photography anyways. For me, it's just like, I can just do it. It's kind of immediate and you eventually get the photos back. And it just is nice to just do something that doesn't feel heavy sometimes. Because for me, making a film can get really heavy sometimes, I guess. I don't know. Definitely. Yeah. And
I feel like sometimes I just need to re-up on some goodness and some knowledge,
Totally, yeah. I'm just going to look at my notes here to see if I have anything else. I guess just wondering what you're up to right now. I mean, you said you're in Milwaukee and you're heading back to Hudson, New York. And what are you up to? What are you doing in there these days?
I've just been trying to read and to work on some photos and take some photos, which has been nice. I'm doing some research around effigy mounds here in Wisconsin. And even just like that's been really like emotionally exhausting, like reading texts and reading histories, and like the main point of contention around the authenticity of the mounds is like who built them. And it's just really exhausting reading historical accounts of Wisconsinites basically saying that my tribe were too savage to have built them, and it must have been some greater civilization that is no longer here. And that just like it's hard to read, and it's hard to like just continue to ingest. And it's one of those things that's it's important to do and to understand how one is perceived in this landscape, and also to assert how these mounds, these beautiful mounds, are an important part of our culture that we know about and that we have relationships to, and we don't need to explain to an archaeologist why and how it's important for them to remain in our care or to remain a part of our culture and our history. So that's what I've been thinking about and working on, and I'm hoping to do a project around it. I've been wanting to do one for a while, and it just does feel good to be back in the homelands, to think about these different landscapes, these hills, these trees.
Well, I mean, I hope that I hope that people can start listening to some of the oral and traditional, knowledge and histories of the indigenous people across Turtle Island, because I mean, it just went over and over again. It's proving to be correct. I mean, there's like the 40,000 or whatever year old village on the West Coast that they discovered in the last couple of years, and that directly it relates to the oral histories of those people that live that have lived there for thousands and thousands of years, and so hopefully, I mean, I don't know, I always think of Winnipeg and Manitoba as a place that has awful history of racism and oppression towards Indigenous people specifically, and but also hopefully a place where some of the greatest points of healing can also come from in some kind of way, And earlier in the weekend, I was talking to, a pretty emerging group of filmmakers, made a feature film in Saskatchewan, very Indigenous driven, and an elder was one of the actors in the film. And although, they had lots of interesting perspectives. One of his perspectives was that, this is never, we're never, this is never going to go away. Like this history will never be forgotten. We will never, as a white colonial or colonizer, we can never forget. And I mean, that just kind of, rang true with me that, you can't just erase this, but, hopefully we, we can do better, in some of these regards at least. So, and I think hopefully your work, will help us get there.
Yeah, that's like, I mean, even with like the origin of death myth, I mean, it comes from the stories, and like thinking about the stories that our elders tell and continue to tell us, and like how that is now our responsibility to tell those stories and continue to share them with the minds and hearts that need to hear them. And yeah, it's just like, I don't know, it felt really important to acknowledge, I mean, obviously, but just like place that last title card in the film, just this is a story from Miles Hudson, and this is a story that he told, and we're still listening to and we're still hearing.
Totally, yeah. Yeah, no, I loved some of the stories of Jordan's grandfather and all of that stuff, and the song that Jordan sings that I believe his grandfather wrote. Anyway, I could talk about this forever. I'm getting like the cut off because we have another film starting in 7 minutes. But thank you enough for taking time to join us today, and just look forward to seeing your next film. So
thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Sky.
Thank you.